Yes, sir. He is retired professor and head department of botany, Sant Gadke Baba Amravati University, Amravati. He was Pro Vice Chancellor of the Sant Gadke Baba Amravati University from 2012 to 2016. Then he was also acting Vice Chancellor for more than 8 months. He also held the post of acting registrar of the same university. He was ex-director of Director BCUD Sant Gadke Baba Amravati University, ex-director IQAC of Sant Gadke Baba Amravati University. Sir has a total teaching experience of 30 years and research experience of 27 years. He did his postdoctoral fellowship in the laboratory of pollination ecology at Haifa University, Israel. He has published more than 65 research papers in the journals of national and international repute. He has successfully organized 2 international conferences and 4 national conferences. 19 PhD students have been awarded PhD under his able guidance. He has successfully completed 3 major research projects. He has visited countries like Israel, Austria, Spain, France, Switzerland, Malaysia, and United Kingdom for academic purposes. He has been awarded with 1 patent. He has delivered more than 45 talks at orientation and refresher course. He is awarded with P.H. Gregory Award, Birbal Sahni Award. He is also member of several academic bodies. He is also editor and reviewer of several journals. Today he is going to talk on flower and pollinator diversity. I, on behalf of Rashtrasant Tukdoji Maharaj Nagpur University and UGC HRDC Center, welcome Professor Jaikiran Tidke sir for this afternoon session, and I request him to deliver the talk on the topic flower and pollinator diversity.
Good afternoon to one and all. Respected Professor Nitin Dongarwar sir, all the participants joining on live. At the outset, let me extend my sincere thanks to Professor Dongarwar sir for availing the opportunity to share my experience with a diverse group of participants, because what I heard is the participants are from different disciplines, or life science. And giving a time to the worker of the institute registrar for the consent to lecture or sharing the experience. Able to all of सर आवाज तो का
हाँ सर येतोय.
हेलो
हॅलो, आवाज येतोय सर.
सर वॉइस
हाँ
थोड़ा
तो
ब्रेक होता है सर. व्हिडिओ ऑफ ठेवा.
हेलो हेलो येतो आहे ना क्लियर येतो आहे हाँ वो ऑफ ओके फॉर यू. तर मला हे कळत नाही आहे की तुम्हाला आवाज येत आहे.
आता येतोय सर.
हॅलो.
हॅलो, आता येतोय.
हॅलो.
हॅलो.
येतो आहे. ठीक आहे.
हा,
चला
येतोय सर.
स्टार्ट नाव.
येस सर. आपल्या स्लाइड शेअरिंग गेलं पण.
सर डिस्कनेक्ट झालेत.
ओके ओके.
Now you can see the
ओके सर.
slide.
या पीपीटी इज विजिबल सर.
Can you
पीपीटी
see
इज
this?
विजिबल.
Okay. So we'll start flower and pollinator diversity. The topic has its relevance to the reproduction in flowering plants and in just लेक्चर मध्ये आहे नंतर करतो का. So it encompasses two partners, that is, one is flower and another is the flower visitor. In broad sense, it is visitor, or in particular, when we have to concern with the pollination, then it is pollinator. Because all visitors are not pollinators, so it is a very specific terminology to use by the student or research. And what is important, whatever material is a good material, whatever we are having, that is the major, this is coming plant, and itself they govern the universe or the ecosystem. They have a lot of effect on the living, the earth surface, and all groups of the very important group plant angiosperm, that the flowering
Okay.
and flowering plants. Obviously, multiplication of
Excuse
the
me,
plant
sir.
is
The voice is breaking actually.
going up to survive you, and they have to. Hello.
Sir, your voice is breaking.
So,
It's not coming
रेंजचा
clear.
प्रॉब्लेम असू शकतो. मी स्पीकर लावू. Can I use the speaker? Hello,
Hello.
is it audible now?
Yes, sir. Now it is audible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Hello. हा ऑडिबल आहे मॅडम.
हो सर, येतो आहे आता आवाज
होय
येतो.
सर, होय सर, होय सर. हेडफोन्स ठीक आहे, माझी पण एनर्जी कमी लागेल हे लावलं तर.
येस सर, आता क्लिअर आहे.
तर okay, okay. Now it is also clear for me. Dear friends, colleagues, amongst the participant, maybe some may be my students or some may be my colleagues or
मैडम आवाज नहीं येत है.
हो सर,
बिल्कुल भी नहीं आवाज आ रही.
मी डोंगरवार सरांना कॉल करते. प्लीज वेट.
सुद्धा येत आहे आणि मॅडम स्लाइड ही पहिली स्लाइड आहे. माझी स्लाइड पण मूव्ह नाही होत आहे. चेंज.
Sandeep sir, are you there?
Madam, voice is not coming.
Yes, sir. Dongarwar sir is calling him, but just wait. संदीप सर, एकदा सरांना कॉल करून बघता का? संदीप हाटे सर.
ओके मैडम, ओके.
हां, प्लीज.
तुम्हाला वर्कशॉप मध्ये बोलावलेलं आहे. मटेरियल कशामध्ये आहे?
Participants, kindly mute
अरे
yourself
बाबा ऐका ना,
or
मटेरियल
leave
कशात
the
दिलंय?
meeting.
Disturbance in voice, ma'am.
Pollinators diversity is our topic. In brief, I have explained you where the topic is belonging, what is the scope of the topic. And now, due to waste of time, I will directly come to problem. What is pollination? Everybody might know that pollination is nothing but the transfer of the male organ, that is pollen grains, from the anthers to the stigma of the flower, that is female reproductive structure. This is merely the um, definition of pollination. However, lot of things are involved, whether the pollen grains are same flower, whether the pollen grains are from another flower, or flower of the same plant, or the different flowers from the two different plants, makes difference in process of pollination. Broadly, we have self pollination and cross pollination. Why more emphasis has to be given to process of pollination is important. In the process of the pollination, the role of the organ of the plant is the pollen. And hello, अरे बाकी मॅडमने सांगितलं नाही येत आहे म्हणून आता. हो,
हो येत आहे सर
सर
आवाज.
आवाज येतोय.
मला फोन होता कोणी पार्टिसिपंट हा त्याचा आवाज नाही येत नाही. एवढे डिस्टर्बन्सेस येतात की काय आहे ते प्रेझेंटेशनची लिंक डिस्टर्ब होऊन जाते. 2 वाक्य झाले की काहीतरी डिस्टर्बन्स. एनिवे, this is the technology and we have to be with technology. So it is nothing but the transfer of the pollen grain from male organ to female organ. The mechanism is pollination. Now, why pollination is important and how pollination is related to the environmental factors, that is pollination ecology. In our country, we only study the reproduction in flowering plants, that's all. We don't bother about the ecological factors which are having the impact on the process of the pollination, or the flower, or the organs which are involved in the process of the pollination. We never bother about the ecological factor or the role of the ecological factors in the process of the pollination. We never thought in this way. There are some in the universities we got say 50 years or 35 years, they have contributed in recent years. The process of the pollination is a part of the ecological system. That is the fact. And all the ecological parameters, they have impact on the process of the pollination. And for that, flower has to develop some structures. In the technical language, with strategy, the flower has to develop some strategies, its own part, to provide whether the flower should be self-pollinated or it should be pollinated. Is the idea behind all the discussion. And why this is important. Firstly, the structure is very important. To the pollutants are the tiny particles or silky particles, or they also particle, and William Cooper was that he was the poet, but he said that pollen grains are very important, precise diamonds, whatever present on the surface of. Why such a importance is given to the pollen grain? Because these are the structures which are carrying the male gametes, and when it produces male gamete after deposition on the stigma, then and only then it become the gametophyte or the gametophytic structure carrying the gametes. Otherwise, it is a pollen or the pollen grain. The structure may be, it may be having 3 cells or 2 cells, depends on the species. And the role of the pollen grain is to discharge the male gamete. That's all. Other functions, other uh, activities are rest of the activities are carried out on the part of the female parts of the flower. Once the pollen grains are released, the function is over. Now the pollen grain has 3 phases. One is development, second is free life, and then post fertilization phase. In free life, the mechanism of pollination involves. In due course of time, during the discussion, I will come on to the points where the ecological factors are involved and how they play the role in ultimate aim of the flower to have the fruit and seed set. That is important. Now, pollination. Why the pollination mechanism is important? Let's see first. Why pollination is important? The first most, some of the things I have shown on the slide, things are in my mind that I said.
झालं तर चांगलं आहे फळ
Hello,
निघत पाहिजे.
hello, आवाज
बरोबर आहे.
तो येतो का? हॅलो, हॅलो, हॅलो,
हा येतोय सर आवाज.
सर,
सर आवाज येतोय
dear participants, dear participants, येतोय ना? ठीक आहे, ठीक आहे. Now, I come to aspect why pollination is important. As we know, in all the flower plants, majority of the plants, they are growing in forest. Some of the varieties which are having economical importance that we are cultivating. The plant jara how to reproduce, maybe or maybe out of all the world plants, 80% of the flowering plants rely on the animals for the pollination. Or somebody may say, what about self-pollinated plants? Because self-pollinated plants, they do not need the vector or the pollinator or the visitor transport pollens. On one hand, this is though they are self-pollinated, there must be some percent of cross-pollination to sustain the generation of progenies together. Otherwise, there may be regression in the crop variety. So, to some extent, I mean to say 10%, 15%, 20% cross-pollination should be there to have the better varieties or the varieties from which you select the seeds for next generation or for this in next season. So pollinators are the animals, they play main role. The Kevan and other, they studied on that aspect and put forward. Otherwise, this data is fluctuating data. Some year it may be 85%, some year it may be 75%. During my presentation, you forgot about the figures because the figures are changing wise. The figures are changing season wise. Figures are changing point wise also. And now more so protected by the they put because
Voice is not coming, madam.
प्रीती मॅडम
Hello.
येतो आहे ना आवाज? हॅलो, बोला.
हो सर आवाज
आता
येतोय.
आता आता आला सर, आता आला.
काय कनेक्टिव्हिटी मध्ये प्रॉब्लेम आहे मला माहित नाही. माझी पण लिंक तुटते मध्येच. सो दॅट वे दी
स्लाइड शेअर करावी लागेल सर.
शेअर केली ना, दिसत नाही आहे का? शेअरिंग होत नाही आहे का?
हो सर,
Hello?
स्लाइड नाही दिसून राहिली सर.
ओके. You can't share content unless the host, co-host or the presenter make you the presenter. तिथून करावं लागेल मला. Co-host मला काय चेंज केलं माहिती नाही. दिसते आता? दिसते आहे?
नाही सर, अजून नाही आली.
त्यांना
नाही
सांगा
सर,
तुम्ही
काहीच दिसत
ऍडमिनिस्ट्रेशनला
नाहीये.
तिथून करा होतं. मी तर शेअर केली आहे मॅडम स्लाइड. शेअरिंग केलेलं आहे मी.
नहीं सर, नहीं दिख रहा है.
You can't share content unless the host. You have to make the host for this meeting again or co-host. The admin has to do it. आपकी तरफ
प्रीति
से
मैडम?
करना पड़ेगा.
प्रीती मॅडम आहे का? प्रीती मॅडम
येस सर.
सर
हा सर.
तुम्हाला मला होस्ट करावं लागेल किंवा होस्ट करावं लागेल पुन्हा. ते डिलिंग वाटते.
ओके सर, मी प्रेझेंटर केलं आहे सर तुम्हाला.
पुन्हा आता झालाय. आलंय? Is it okay now?
हो सर.
सर येत आहे.
I think it
प्रोसेस
is
मध्ये
okay
आहे.
now. येत आहे.
हा येस सर, नाव इट इज विजिबल.
Yes sir.
So I have tried to explain in brief with so many hurdles in connectivity. जशी कॉम्प्युटरची कनेक्टिव्हिटी जाते तशी माझी प्रेझेंटेशनची पण कनेक्टिव्हिटी जाते. We have to restore anyway. So come to the point. I have explained what is the pollination mechanism. Now, in the process of the pollination, different partners on the part of the visitors or on the part of the pollinators, they are distributed in different groups of the animals. And we have the data here, world's cultivated crop pollination in percentage of pollinators. In percentage of pollinators, not in percentage of the crop or the variety of the crop. So most of the pollination mechanism in percentage, that is maximum is 73 by the species of the bees. Here I have to add something. कारण मी आधी सांगितलं साईडवर खूप कमी गोष्टी आहेत, त्याच्यापेक्षा जास्त गोष्टी महत्त्वाच्या आहेत. नाव हिअर species of the bees, they are social bees. Yeah, some are the which not social bees, these are solitary bees. However, they contribute to the transfer of the pollen grain. We have to take consideration the role of the social top species of their common in Korea, Episodal, Sarka, and species there. The role of social is that important. Because throughout the are provided by this. There is an instant you can remember. If the bees disappear from the world with three, the human will appear. So he was the teacher. This is realize the importance of the role of honeybee. And today, this percentage of the pollinators may be 75% up to 80% in some places. If we have lost the honeybees, then what can happen? You can imagine. So we have to conservation of the flowers and animals. Totally, the nature is rely on power of pollinator. So, 8% is done by and flies, 6.5% by bats, 5% wasps of the butterfly like nature, percent the beetles, which are the insects which are educated body, beetles, and 2% by the birds, that is the ornithophilus fly, 4% by butterflies. The old uh, observation major honey only. So conservation of all these partners from the ecosystem, which we call as a vectors of the pollinators of the vector. Now I will one thing here, which are pollinators and which are visitors. Some very casual to flower. If continue the insect is visiting the flower more taken as a the casual visitors. On way they can visit so many flowers. It visit, then the repeated visit carried out only by those visitors who can serve as a pollinator that particular crop. This is the fact. Now, as we know, it is a important phenomenon the pollen grain from male structure to the female structure. Impact of the result or ultimate is fruit so that in conservation strategies or conservation and sustainable use of pollinator in agriculture and forestry is the need today. Why we have to conserve the flower visitors? It may be bird, it may be cat, it may be flies, it may be gnats, or it may be beetles, whatever may be. We have
Again, sir has disconnected.
मैम तो समझ में नहीं आ रहा है कुछ भी
Yes, I can understand, but I'm helpless. I'm sorry.
we can classify all these things into groups, that is self pollination and cross pollination. Leave it. Now, how many types of the pollinations are there? The major types I will explain. One is autogamy, that is the transfer of the pollen grain from anther to the stigma of same flower, that is self pollination. Autogamy is nothing but the self-pollination. Allogamy, transfer of the pollen grains from anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant or the another plant. So it may be diatonogamy or xenogamy. Then diatonogamy and xenogamy, here I have mentioned both these. Only differences of the ramets are the different type of different plants involved in the pollination. Now these are the some pollination mechanisms broadly classified. Then come to the point. When we say that, काय झालंय? आवाज येतो? हॅलो?
हा सर, आवाज येतोय आता.
आवाज येतो
हा
सर.
सर आवाज आहे
आवाज आहे पण प्रेझेंटेशन दिसत नाही सर. कंटिन्यू करा, काही इश्यू नाही सर. चालू दे.
प्रेझेंटेशन दिसलं पाहिजे ना?
हो सर, दिसायला तर पाहिजे पण नाही येत आहे ऍक्च्युली. पीपीटी नाही
तिथून
दिसत आहे.
शेअर तिथून शेअर होत नाही काहीतरी. माझ्याकडून ओपन आहे. मी पुन्हा एकदा कन्फर्म करतो. कारण मला काही प्रेझेंटेशनचं काम नाही. आय कॅन स्पीक फॉर 6 hours or more than 6 hours. नाही. प्रश्न आहे, पण शेअर what experience the field. होस्ट राहतो आणि निघून जातो. दिसते का आता?
नाही सर, अजून नाही.
तुम्ही तिकडून आता दिसत असेल. तिकडनं काहीतरी होते आहे तुमच्याकडनं. आता दिसत असेल. ओके.
नो सर नो. आता पण
आवा.
दिसत नाहीये.
नाही ना.
सर, नाहीतर मेल करता का
एक
पीपीटी
मिनिट.
कडे, मग आपण HRDC मधनं हे रन करू शकतो. हा, आता दिसतंय सर.
आलं सर.
आता
इट इज विजिबल.
तुम्ही फक्त मला सांगा, जेव्हा दिसत नसेल तेव्हा मला फक्त सांगा आता दिसत नाही म्हणून. हा? होईल कंटिन्यू. त्याला पुन्हा पुन्हा शेअर करा. मला माझ्या तयार आहे. करून
परत नाही दिसत आहे सर.
हॅलो. Now come to the mechanisms of the pollination. Ecological perspective of the process of the pollination can divide it into two depending on the part which is involved hello. 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 Hello.
हॅलो सर, आवाज येतोय?
येस सर, येस सर.
Pollination may be avoided. It be biopollination. Very clear to all. This is what is abiotic and what is biotic. Abiotic elements. The abiotic elements are those from environment, surrounding environment, which involve in the transfer of pollination, and these are two elements. One is wind, another is water. The phenomena of transfer of pollen from the anther to stigma with the help of the air current is very common. and the process is anemophily. It is revealing in poaceae, gramineaceae members, cyperaceae member, juncaceae member. म्हणजे प्रत्येक याच्यामध्ये the monots are there. जेवढं स्लाइडवर आहे तेवढ्या पुरतं मर्यादित नाही. Why pollination is in the primitive form important? Then what structure of the pollen grain in wind pollinated plants? What is the structure of the pollen grain and how much quantity of pollen grain produced? The plants are pollinated the plants are pollinated with the help of the air. Usually they have plants. So they have many number and of plants. Numerous are shaded out and they is in or unevenly in the surrounding. प्रॉब्लेम होतो तिकडे. हॅलो
हा सर, आवाज ब्रेक होतोय मध्ये मध्ये.
त्याला आता मी काय करू शकतो, काय करू?
सर कंटिन्यू करा, काही प्रॉब्लेम नाही.
कोणी ऐकत नसेल तर कंटिन्यू करून काय?
नाही, आवाज येतोय मध्ये मध्ये, हे होतोय.
शेअरिंग पुन्हा बंद झालं. शेअरिंग सर,
स्लाइड दिसते
शेअरिंग
सर.
का बंद होत?
स्लाइड दिसून राहिली सर तुमची.
दिसतंय.
अबायोटिक पॉलिनेशन, विंड वॉटर सर्वे अंडर. हा, ते दिसून राहिली.
अच्छा. The structure of the pollen is different and those pollinated by the insects of the animals in general is different. In case of the pollinated plants in anemophily, number of they are produced in huge number in mass because to ensure to have the guaranteed pollination or the deposition of the pollen grain this stigma. So that the has its own strategy. Some of pollen grains will produce more in or so there may be some chance or there is a chance to some of the lucky pollen grains to get deposited on the stigma of the flower. And these pollen grains they don't have any ignite or cyanide structure on the exam on the valve and surface of the pollen grain or the exine of the pollen grain is smooth and these pollen grains are type of chain are not secretion of any wax-like structure of like structure of pollen grains. That pollen grains are powder that can flow to the air current with popular current and grasses are there. They can use it. Most of the grasses, cyperus members, member, they are wind pollinated. Prior to that, now come to a little bit about the earlier group of the plant. If you go to the gymnosperm, because the gymnosperm, then angiosperm group is there. If you observe in case of the gymnosperm, I will give directly the example of the pinus. If you see the pinus male cone, lot of crores pollen grains are released from the pineal cone. They have the wing and they are dispersed, or almost other plants are there where they are producing a huge number of the pollen grains, and they can transfer 10 kilometers distance, and they got the chance to deposit on the micropile, or say on the having the hydrophilic mechanism, transfer of the pollen grain with the water current. Now, it is some to accept whether water is responsible for the transfer of the pollen grain. Some doubt may be in our mind, and it is a restricted phenomena. Why restricted? Because the hydrophilous plants, they are restricted. Obviously, the hydrophilous plant will grow in water, so that we call them as hydrophytes. And in hydrophytes, the flowering hydrophytes, they are very less in number. They are very less in number. However, I have mentioned here some of the example, Vallisneria, then Tidke, some of the plants which are growing in the water, are under the, all of the water are in the water bodies. Depends. Now, with help of water, pollen transfer possible. So, why it is possible? Because pollen grains are teeny structure, and they are the bladder-like structures, like double bladder-like structure, and they have buoyancy. That is the important feature of the pollen grain. They have the buoyancy. Put pollen grains on the surface of the water, they can run on the surface of the water. Along the water, they carry the differences with the water current. So it may be the surface of, it may be underwater, or with there the underwater, the phenomenon of pollination can take place. The happen होते हैं. काही some plants where the flowers remain underwater. I will give one example. In case of the lotus, we have the flower, the plant is hydrophyte, growing in the water, deep water, or the some 10 feet or sometime 5 feet, whatever it may be. And flower comes out on the surface of the water. Now it is possible for the visitor to visit and to collect the pollen. But in the plants which are having the flowers which are open just on the surface of the water, water level and flower opening level, calyx, corolla, that is same. And when the flower is on the surface and pollen are shed, म्हणजे anther day झाल्यानंतर the anthers they remain around the flower. When there is a water current is there, the pollen grain will strike to the stigma, that on the surface only. जसं in case of the Vallisneria, it happens. I don't have figures, but you can go to the internet or say on the net. A lot of things are available. I want to tell you is the concept. To put the concept in your mind. So the pollinators are deposited with current of the water in those plants which are having flowers floating on the surface of the water. That's all. And the mechanism is known as hydrophily. EP, you know epidermis, layer epidermis. Then another mechanism of pollen transfer with the help of the water, that is underwater, that is hypohydrophily. Here I have mentioned 18 submerged and 12 some monocots genera, which are the marine. They are having such type of the transfer of the pollen grain. Now, how it happens? That is the mechanism. How the mechanism is. The flowers remain throughout the life of the flower. Flowers life कुठपर्यंत आहे? But to mature flower up to dehiscence of the anther and up to maturity of the sex organs, both male and female. That will be the life of the flower. So when the flower is underwater, when the microsporogenesis is finished and the flower have the matured pollen grains. These mature pollen grains, when released, they make the area, water area around them. Bubble-like area is there. And with this bubble-like structure, they transfer from one place to another place. आता याचे chances किती आहेत? It doesn't matter. But it happens. It is the mechanism. So the pollen grains are transferred from the anthers to the stigma, and ultimately they are deposited on the stigma surface underwater. So the mechanism is known as hypohydrophily, epihydrophily, and hydrophily. So these are the two abiotic factors. Now, what are the ecological consequences, or which are the ecological conditions in both these type of pollination is important. Now, in case of the air pollinated crops, I have told you the pollen grains are lighter, they are having smoother wall, and they are producing huge number. One thing, the temperature has the impact on the air pollinated crop directly. The humidity have the impact on the transfer of the pollen grain. Then the water, the air current, the speed of the air have the impact on. So all these factors should be joined and studied jointly, how the mechanism is going on. If suppose if there is more humidity or rainy days is there, how it is possible to transfer the pollen from anther to the stigma through the air current? Not possible. But the plant and nature, on the other hand, they have the understanding, hand to hand understanding. And ultimately, whatever may be the condition, anyhow, they will proceed, and condition will result into fruit and seed set by some mean of transfer of the pollen grains. These are the conditions. Then in case of the hypohydrophily, epihydrophily, if the water current is water is floating so speedy, how it is possible that there will be striking of the pollen grain on the stigma? The doubt may come in our mind. Apart from that, at some places where the plants are growing, maybe at some time the stagnancy of water may be there during that particular period when the flowers, when the plant is flowering, or the flowering season of the plant is there, and thereafter, after producing the seed, the seed may be dispersed. Now, this is the big problem. Who will study all these things? We have to complete the research in 4, 5, 6 years, and we have to submit, get it awarded, and get it be reflected in the assessment and promotion and all these things. Who will do that? God knows. Leave it. Now, another aspect, another partner involved in the pollination is the biotic pollination. The word itself, मला वेळ झाली म्हणजे सांगाल. किती वेळपर्यंत बोलायचं आहे मला?
सर कंटिन्यू करा सर, काही प्रॉब्लेम नाही.
Okay, तुम्ही सांगाल मला. Now come to the another partner involved in the process of the transfer of the pollination, that is biotic. No need to explain what is biotic. All the living creatures which are involved in the process of the pollination are the pollinators. As they are living, that is the biotic factor. So many animals are there involved. So many animals, it may be bee, it may be bat, it may be butterfly, it may be bird, it may be monkey, it may be elephant, it may be ant, whatever, so and so forth. So many animals are involved in transfer of the pollen grains. Some of the insects are involved in the transfer of the pollen grain. Some of the beetles are involved. Some of the flies are involved. So it is nothing but involvement of the living organism in transfer of the pollen grains, and accordingly they are classified, or we have the syndromes in the plants. Some technical words, म्हणजे things we have to define in technical manner or say in scientific manner. एखादी गोष्ट साधी असताना त्याला टेक्निकल मॅनर मध्ये, सायंटिफिक मॅनर मध्ये we have to understood, and ultimately this is not for the participants of this course. Why I'm telling, after going to the colleges we have to explain the way in which manner these students can understood the subject, that is the matter. So technically we have to define the things, scientifically we have to define the things, and uh, such type of terminologies they become cumbersome to the students. It is difficult to remember all these things, but for the sake of understanding the subject, we have here, I have mentioned some of the syndromes in pollination where there is a involvement of the living creature, biotic creature. When it is by the animal, हे आता generalized term आहे. Animals, all types of animals. So it is zoophily. If it is by insect, it is entomophily. If it is by the beetles, it is scantherophily. If it is by the flies, myophily. If it is by specifically, categorically by the flies which are produced in the dung or the dung flies, sapromyophily. Moths are butterfly like creature. Moth आणि butterfly मध्ये फारसा फरक करता येत नाही. ज्याला zoological त्याचे मॉर्फोलॉजिकल फीचर्स माहित आहे, दे कॅन डू इट. मॉथ्स, ज्याला पतंगा म्हणतो आपण, पतंगा मॉथ्स, दे आर इन्व्हॉल्व. The mechanism is phelenophily. When butterflies are involved, psychophily. Bees, melitophily or melisophilie is also known. Then ants, myremocophily, birds, ornithophily, bats, chiropterophily. Now, when so many biotic creatures are involved in the process of the transfer of the pollen grain, the question may come to our mind that whether it is accident, whether it is accidentally they are visiting the flower and doing the business of transfer of the pollen grain from one flower to another flower. असं आपल्याला वाटू शकतं. But the nature has all the program well planned. Programmed system is there. Each and everything is defined. Each and everything is definite, and each and everything has its own role in the biological processes. It may be abiotic, it may be biotic. And when we say that they are involved in the transfer of the pollen grains from anther to the stigma, then why they visit the flower is the question. Because there should be something that should be rewarded, or some reward should be there, or some gain should be there. If there is some gain, only and only then the insect. म्हणजे हा जिवंत प्राण्याचं वैशिष्ट्य आहे. विदाऊट काही भेटल्याशिवाय कोणी कुठे जात नाही. काही भेटत असेल तरच तिथे आपण जातो, काही मिळत असेल तरच जातो. उगीच कोणी कुणाच्या इथं जात नाही, उगीच कोणी कोणाला भेटत नाही. सेम थिंग इज देअर. इट इज नॉट अन ऍक्सिडेंट. दे go purposefully, visit purposefully to the flower. Now what they gain? Actually flower visits. That means ecologically there are two elements. One is biotic, one is abiotic, or both are biotic. One is visitor, one is animal, another is plant. There is relation between these two. Whether these two partners are co-evolved, whether these two partners are related to each other, whether these two partners are helping to each other, whether these two partners are linked up maybe in energy, energy pyramid, or energy, or the food chain in the ecosystem, or whether they are doing all this business without any plan of the nature. It is never like that. Everything is planned. Why? The flower color is red, blue, whatever it may be. The flower colors have important role. The flower structure have important role. The components of the floral parts, say calyx, corolla, anthoecium, gynoecium, they have the definite role. Along with the some additional structure like nectaries are there, or other structures are there, or some modifications are there. They have their own role in the process of the pollination, though there is independent appearance, or on the scale of the evolution they are evolved independently. Nectar independently evolved झालं असेल, flower independently evolved झालं असेल, or the reproductive organs they are evolved independently, and the other structure they have evolved independently. Here important aspect is two partners, one is visitor, any animal, and another is flower structure. We have the very good book on this relationship written by Lepik. You can refer this book written by Lepik. Or on the part of the pollination ecology, we have the book of Figry and Pijal. Another book by Marie Percival, Floral Biology. Why I am asking this name of all these books? Because these are the classical books. These are the classical books. One should read it once in a life. Such a great material is available. Now, some books are available on internet also. In the age of this computer and molecular biology, uh, think that we should not ignore the classical things. If we go through these classical books, all the concept will get clear, and we will come to know the role of the different components, biotic and abiotic components of the ecosystem. To study the ecosystem, to study the diversity, biodiversity is very important. Now is a need of day, need of time. Otherwise, the life can be lost from the earth surface. Those days are very near. जेव्हा आपण biodiversity conservation वर बोलू, that time I will explain some of the things that I come across throughout my service. So the all these things, the role of flower and role of pollinator, that is well planned. The structure of the flower itself is responsible for the process of the reproduction through either self pollination or through either cross pollination. Anyway, there should be mechanism of pollination. जसं म्हणतो की आपण the show must go on. Pollination should be there so that the flowers may have relations with the abiotic elements. The flower may have relations with the biotic elements. They will play their role. Otherwise, the flower itself will take decision. काय decision घेणार? Whether I should be self pollinated or cross pollinated, and accordingly there will be change in the structure of the flower to favor the self pollination, either one on one hand, or to favor the cross pollination on the other hand. Some of only one example just now I will give you. Only one. If male and female flowers are developing on different plants, obviously cross pollination will there. Second example, if the flowers are of closed type, flower openness होत नाही, the sex organs remain within the closed type of flower, जसे Papilionaceae मध्ये आहेत, Fabaceae मध्ये आहेत. This flower never open. What is the way for pollination? Only self pollination. So if the flower is producing the sex organs, that is female sex organ at the base, and the anther filaments, they are so long, then how it is possible to pollinate if they are special mechanism? If the timing of maturity of two sex organs, male sex organ, that is release of the anther and receptivity of the stigma is not matching, then what will happen? Obviously, there will be cross pollination, because by that time the other flower may be matured, shedded the pollen grain, and these pollen grains by that time will pollinate the stigma. So there are strategies, there are ways on the part of the visitor and on the part of the flowers. Ultimate way why the flowers are visited by the pollinators, that is important. There are different reasons. There are different reasons why the insects or the animals they visit the flower. Two things are there now. One is floral attractant. This is only attractant, and another is floral reward. I want to make very clear that floral attractant is, maybe it may be usual, or it may be some sort of scent or other type of, but it will not give any sort of energy to the visitor. Reward is that substance which will give the energy to the visitors. This is in simple way floral attractants and reward. For example, another example I will give, the color of the flower. It is attractive one, but it is not a reward. काही फूल अट्रॅक्टिव्ह आहे म्हणून व्हिजिटरचं पोट भरते किंवा त्याला काही एनर्जी मिळते असं नाही. सो स्ट्रिक्टली these two groups you are met. Why ultimately the visitors visit the flower? That is the million rupees question ज्याला म्हणतो आपण. Why ultimately why they visit? Butterflies why visit flower? Honeybees why visit flowers? Bats why visit flowers? The bats why visit flowers? Any visitor why it visits? What is the relation between these two elements of the ecosystem, two partners of the ecosystem, whether they are go hand in hand or whether they are evolved simultaneously, whether one is in need, another is not any need, or whether both are in need for some purpose, one or other purpose. What is the reason? Ultimately, reason, foremost reason is urge for the food. पहिले जसं माणसाचं पोट पहिले भरलं पाहिजे. The visitors will visit the flower to gain some energy. When the visitor is going around in the surrounding environment, that is there will be loss of the energy, and this energy should have been gained through the surrounding resources. मग काय resources आहे? Which are the resources to gain this energy for these little creatures? Honeybee are very small creatures, bats, and these are the small one. How they are being provided the food by the nature? Here makes the relation of the visitor and the flower. And the visitors foremostly or mostly they visit the flower for or in search of the food, and when they visit the flower for some reward award from the flower, then it is the reward, or rewards class is another one, and the floral attractant class is another one. How many types of floral attractants are there, and how many types of rewards are there? The important reward, one by one pahu आता आपण. The first reward, which is the important and original reward for the visitor, like honeybees, social bees, solitary bees, or the thrips, or the beetles, small, very small creatures visiting flower or remaining inside the flower, is the pollen grain. That means I mean to say pollen grain is the original attractant for these visitors. And about the pollen grain, whether the flower exists first or whether the pollen grains they exist first, आता आपल्याला जास्त प्रश्न उत्तर इथे करता येत नाहीत. We can't share the ideas, otherwise you all are the professors. All are professors sitting here. हे मी चांगलं लक्षात ठेवून आहे की माझ्या समोर बसलेले प्रोफेसर्स आहे. Okay? And when we have to share, I am not teaching anything. I am sharing my experiences, what I learned in last 30 years. When we see that the flower and the pollen grains, pollen grains are evolved before the flower. How we can prove it? How it is possible? It is possible. The flowers, the flowering plants develop later. Prior to that, non-flowering plant जिम्नोस्पर्म असतील किंवा त्याच्या आधी टेरिडोफाइट्स असतील, त्याच्या आधी ब्रायफाइट्स असतील, त्याच्या आधी algae असेल, whatever may be. In those plants, what was the male structure? There was some male structure, and these male structures are nothing but the microspores. Microspore, pollen grain is also known as microspore. कसं? The microsporogenesis is the mechanism which we study under the embryology or some topics of the palynology. Microsporogenesis. Pollen grain is nothing but the microspore. Pollen grain is nothing but the microspores. That means they existed before the flower. In course of the evolution, in due course of evolution, the fructification which is present in the angiospermic plants, they develop into the flower later on in due course of the time. इव्होल्युशनच्या स्केलवर जसं जसं आपण पुढे पुढे जातो, algae पासून तर जिम्नोस्पर्म पासून तर angiosperm पर्यंत, the flowers are the recent structures. The flowers are in flowering plants, you can see very complicated structure, and they have very specialized organs in the flowers, and they are involved in the process of the pollination. It's a unique mechanism which is represented by the flowering plants only. Pollination फक्त flowering plants मध्ये आहे, अर्लियर मध्ये नाही. म्हणजे जिम्नोस्पर्म मध्ये आपण pollination mechanism म्हणतो, पण it is not actually the pollination mechanism, because the gymnosperm don't have the receptive organ like stigma. However, in the history of the evolution of the angiosperm, the flower develops later, pollen grains were already there. And in case of the flower visitor, when pollen grains are produced, they are produced many in number. In angiospermic plants, if you see the primitive families, Anonaceae, पहिली family पहा. In case of the primitive families, number of anthers, they are many. Number of pollen grains, they are produced many in number. Huge mass of pollen grain is produced. And the pollen grains, they are easily visible, easily visible to the visitor. The pollen mass is there, they are yellow in color or some spectrum yellow or brownish color is there, and they are have the unique structure. Sometimes they have the unique scent also, pheromone like scent. So the pollen grains, they attract the visitor. If you observe the honeybees, they are collecting the pollen grain. I have a lot of videos of the bees, whether collecting the pollen grains and the flowers which are involved in the huge production of the pollen grain. Important is ecological aspect of the pollen grains, how they are available, easily available for the visitor. Visitor can collect the pollen grain without any expertise. कसं ते सांगतो मी, how it is easy. It is in contrast with the liquids. It is in contrast with the, to be in particular, with the nectar which is secreted in the flower. लिक्विड कलेक्ट करणे थोडं कठीण आहे, सॉलिड पार्टिकल्स कलेक्ट करणं सोपी आहे. Simply, the pollen is easily available. They can be collected, or collection of the pollen grain is simpler than the nectar, because we have concern with the floral rewards, and these two rewards are very important: pollen and the nectar. So pollen grains can be collected easily as they are the grains. And why the pollen grains are collected again? We have to see why the pollen grains are collected. The pollen grains are the rich source of the food. For example, they have proteins. एक रफ एस्टिमेट स्लाइडवर काढलेला आहे. हॅलो, येतो आहे ना आवाज?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
हो सर, क्लिअर आहे एकदम आवाज, एकदम
हा,
क्लिअर आहे.
okay, okay. You can see the pollen is a rich source of the food, specially proteins. 16 to 30% प्रोटीन्स पोलन ग्रेन मध्ये आहेत. स्टार्च आहे, शुगर आहे, फॅट्स आहे, ऍशेस आहे. In our laboratory, we have the phytochemistry of more than 100 plants, that too of pollen grains. And this is in average, in the range, or you can see this in some textbook or reference books also, not a very new one, new thing. But if you analyze the pollen grain, phytochemistry of the pollen, you will come to know this factor. Some vitamins are also there, some free elements are also there, so that the pollen grains are collected by the honeybees. They are collected in the basket. They have the bag-like structure on their legs. With the help of the forelegs, they collect the pollen grain and deposit it in the basket. And we can have here, you can see in this diagram. This is the original photograph. This is also original one, not taken from any textbook or reference book. This is Chalepensis. मला genusचं नाव सांगतो पुढे आहे. And this is common aster. Here the pollen presentation you can see, and collection of the pollen grains is also there. If you go to the internet, you can have the idea of the pollen grains, what they contents. म्हणजे मी काही नवीन सांगतो असं अजिबात नाही. Lot of things are available on the net. Now pollen are present in such a manner which are readily available for the visitor. They can collect. Here is another flower where the bamboos. This is the picture from Carmel Mountain, Israel, during my postdoc in Haifa University. And another diagram what I was thinking to tell you is the Ruta chalepensis. This is some apis species, maybe Apis mellifera, collecting the pollen grains. So you can see काय पाहायचं इथं, insect, the bee is collecting pollen. This is not important. Let us see how many flowers are open in bunch. The cluster of the flowers is there, and so many pollen grains can be collected in single trip, so that the energy of the insect will be saved. Economy पाहिल्या जाते. Economically they will save the pollen grains. Now save the energy and collect the pollen grains, and these pollen grains are carried out to the hives, and they will deposit this pollen grain in the hives, and they are made available. Now in pollen grain, where the food is stored, if you see the structure of the pollen grain, it is double layered bladder like structure, exine and intine. Then inside the pollen grain, very small. आता pollen grain ची साईज जर पाहिली आपण तर 10 म्यू पासून तर काही 200-300 म्यू पर्यंत मॅक्सिमम आहे. In such a small structure, all these things are present, and they are needed by the small creatures like the social bees or the bees, honey bees, like that. And they will use it as a food. That means it is a source of the food. In the right side, you can see the pollen powder. Actually, this diagram I could get from Professor Shivanna from Delhi University. He worked out lot of genera for the pollination ecology. And while doing work, once he had been to our department, and he presented something to me. And this is one of the presentation by Professor K.R. Shivanna, who is the giant personality from India to work on pollination, pollination biology, then lot of other branches, recent branches too, molecular biology, reproductive biology, so and so forth. So these are the vials you can see. These are the pollen grains collected from the apiaries. To collect the pollen grain from apiaries, is it possible? It is possible because in apiaries they keep the cages, and through this cage, when the honeybee try to pass towards the hives, the whatever pollen load is there, it is get detached from the leg of the honeybee, and such pollen grain. Now here you can see the color of the pollen grains. Here different species चे pollen grain आहे, वेगवेगळ्या plant चे pollen grain आहेत, and they have a specific color. And when the season of specific particular plant is going on, the honeybee will collect the pollen grains of that particular plant. Okay, and the pollen grains are deposited and collected. I would like to show you one picture where you can see here, this is the pollen load on the leg of the honeybee. This is honeybee. Even though in your home ads or home garden or kitchen garden, if you minutely observe the honeybees, they have two globe-like structure on their legs, middle, last leg, where दोन गोळे असे त्याच्या पायावर दिसतील. These are the pollen grains collected by the honeybee and deposited. Or in case of the xylocopa, ज्याला आपण भुंगा म्हणतो, भिंगोठा म्हणतो, on the legs of the xylocopa, you can observe the pollen load. Or in European countries, the xylocopa like creature, that is bamboos, is there. Here you can see bamboos. This photograph is from PhD student, maybe Dr. Dahat or somebody. So the pollen grains are collected this way by the honeybee. They are deposited in pollen basket. त्याला वर्ड पण पोलन बास्केटच आहे. जसं आपण मार्केटमधून बास्केटमध्ये सामान आणतो, तसे हे पोलन बास्केटमध्ये पोलन घेऊन जातात. अँड व्हॉट एव्हर अमाऊंट ऑफ पोलन ग्रेन इज कलेक्टेड, that is known as pollen load, and per bee you can calculate the pollen load. So these are the aspects of the pollen grains as a reward, because phytochemically they serve as a food for the visitor, so that the visitor visit the flowers to collect the pollen grain, and inadvertently, unknowingly, what is the result? The result is that the flowers are get pollinated due to the visit of the insect. So many visits are there to collect the pollen grains, and during this act, the pollen grains purposefully collected in the pollen basket, or inadvertently, mass of the pollen grain is get deposited on the body of the honeybee. If you observe the honeybee closely, lot of hairy structure is there, and in this hair so many pollen grains are there. When it visit number of flowers, obviously the pollen grain will be carried out with the insect body, and they will stick up somewhere to the stigma, and stigma will get pollinated. Unknowingly जरी असले तरी they are doing the service of the pollination free of charge. Nobody can do it. It is free of charge. So both are benefited. Flower ला benefit आहे, pollination झाल्यामुळे there will be fruit set, seed set, whatever may be. म्हणजे अल्टिमेटली yield जास्त असेल, याचा रिप्रोडक्शनचा पार्ट कॅरी झाला, आणि व्हिजिटरचा he get the food from the flower. ठीक आहे. Then pollen grains are the rewards, as I have told you, but it can be served as attractant. कसं? The insect have the sense of smell. They can smell certain objects, and when a particular smell is there, if you observe in nocturnal plants, ज्या प्लांट्सला रात्री फ्लावर्स येतात त्याला खूप सेंट असतो. ती in night कारण लाईट कमी असल्यामुळे देअर शुड बी सम क्ल्यू टू दी व्हिजिटर where is our object, and they can locate their object with the help of the odor. In general, the calyx and corolla, sometimes androsium or base of the androsium gynosium, there are some glands. They generally secrete the they have the oil glands. The sense scent can come from these glands. Oil glands, scented oil glands असतात आणि त्याच्यामधून येणारा odor can be the clue. But in case of the pollen grains, sometime in some plants, some genus, the pollen grains itself, they have some type of odor. पोलनला स्वतःलाच काहीतरी असा सुगंध असतो, so that the pollinators or the visitors are attracted toward the pollen grain. And another thing on the part of the pollination is the pollen grains are produced in great quantities. And when the flower produces huge number of pollen grains, mass of the pollen grain, actually in flowers, either they need few pollen grains to fertilize the ovule. जितके ovules आहेत तितके pollen grains लागतील. 4 ovules असतील 4 pollen grains, पण crores of pollen grains are produced. If the more seeds, depending on the number of the seeds produced and aborted seeds, you can come to the number of the seeds per flower. जेवढे seeds आहेत तेवढे pollen grain पाहिजे होते असं आपण गृहीत धरू. However, in multiple of hundreds, thousands, the pollen grains are produced. कशासाठी? It is a strategy of the nature to ensure successful pollination anyhow, so that it is guaranteed. It is guaranteed. Out of all these pollen grain, one or two or some will strike on the stigma, and there will be fertilization, so that they are produced in huge number. And the flower which produces more number of or in mass the pollen grains, then these flowers are known as pollen flowers. This is pollination ecological terminology. The flower in which the nectar is produced in more quantity, large quantity, then the flower is known as nectar flower. In the mechanism, floral pollination mechanism, the flowers are classified on the base of the reward. Either it may be pollen flower, either it may be nectar flower. So that here is a mention of pollen flowers, the flower in which great quantities of the pollen grains are produced. Then pollen has thus two functions. One is microspore and attractants. Basically, the pollen grain is a male reproductive organ which carries the gamete, two male gametes within the pollen grain. सध्या तो गॅमेटोफाइट नाही आहे. Once the pollen grain is deposited on stigma, it will absorb the water, then pollen tube will emerge and the nucleus will divide. Tube nucleus, cell nucleus, or the nucleus will divide, and there will be generative nucleus will divide in two. One is tube nucleus, then it will may have three cell structure. At that time, when the pollen tube emerges, at that time it becomes the male gametophyte. Otherwise, it is pollen grains. Now, pollen grain is a male gametophyte carrying unit, or itself is a male gametophyte when they are produced or matured on the stigma. Apart from this role, तो main role त्याचा आहे to carry the male gametes. Apart from this, it serve as a attractant also in so many plants, so that the insects or the visitors or the animals, they attract towards the flower, and in return the flowers are pollinated. Then another important features in the visitors which are visiting the flowers or the animals, flower visitors, is they are having the specialized devices on their bodies. For example, the bees have a lot of hairs on their body. The bees have the pollen baskets, or in some insects other than bees, mandibular parts are there, in especially in case of the uh, polyopteron insects. The mandibles, they can cut the pollen grain, they can suck, or sometimes they have the sucking device. They can suck the juice from the flower, and they can digest the contents of the nectar, not flower, the contents of the pollen grain. So they will sip out the contents of the pollen grain. That means sometimes the pollen collecting devices are also designed in some animals. Otherwise, ज्याचा टच झाला त्याच्या बॉडीवर pollen grain पडणार, and they will be carried out from one flower to another flower, or say from male organ to the female organ. So that this is the role of a biotic component. Under biotic component, the animals visiting the flowers to collect the pollen grains. This is the first reward. Pollen as a reward and attractant both. Now, the pollen has, as I have told you, the pollen has another role also. कोणता रोल? एक आहे रिप्रोडक्शन मधला, दुसरा आहे अट्रॅक्टंट. नाउ डिपेंडिंग ऑन दी pollen grains role in the mechanism of reproduction, we can have the idea of the reproductive system represented by the particular flower depending on the number of pollen grains produced per flower. सर आपण इथे थांबायचं का?
हो सर, चालेल.
थांबू? वाटल्यास उद्या कंटिन्यू करू.
हो सर, उद्या कंटिन्यू करता येईल आहे. उद्या
हाच
पण
टॉपिक कंटिन्यू करू, किंवा अजून एखादा पिरियड असला, एखादा तास असला तर बायोडायव्हर्सिटी ते कंटिन्यू करू आपण.
ठीक आहे ना सर, उद्या पण सेम वेळेसच आहे 1:30 वाजता.
3:30 वाजले, कारण आता फक्त एक रिवार्ड झाला, कारण अजून पुष्कळ अजून असं 25-30 स्लाइड्स.
अरे
12
ठीक
स्लाइड
आहे
झाल्या.
सर. ओके सर, उद्या
12
कंटिन्यू
स्लाइड
करा.
झाल्या. 41 स्लाइड आहेत, आणि याचे वेगळे 3 प्रेझेंटेशन अजून नाहीत. या प्रेझेंटेशनच्या पोटात असणार आहे.
ओके.
तुम्हाला किती वेळ आहे हे मला सांगा, कारण मी आधीच सांगितलं, मी 5, 6, 7 तास या टॉपिकवर सतत कंटिन्यू बोलू शकतो.
डोंगरवार सर.
हा मॅडम.
हा.
थांबलं. 3:30 वाजले सर, आता थांबू, उद्या कंटिन्यू करू.
उद्या कंटिन्यू करा सर. फक्त एक कराल, इथे मध्ये हा जो टेक्निकल प्रॉब्लेम झाला ना आज,
हो हो,
आता हा पीपीटी मॅडमच्या ईमेलवर, म्हणजे HRDCच्या ईमेलवर जर शेअर केला तर मॅडम इकडनं जर शेअर करतील ना, तर मग
हो.
प्रॉब्लेमच जाणार नाही सर मग. कारण की
ठीक
आता
आहे
जो
ना.
आवाज हा
चालेल ना.
चालेल सर, मॅडम
हा,
शेअर करतील. हो,
मॅडमचा मेल मला पाठवून द्या.
मी
हा
पाठवून देईल
PPT
सर.
सर्व पार्टिसिपंटला सर्क्युलेट केला तरी चालेल सर.
चालेल. हो सर,
कुठेतरी कामी येईल तो.
बिलकुल सर, बिलकुल बिलकुल. थँक्यू सर.
Let us stop here. After a very long gap, I am enjoying the sharing of thoughts on pollination and pollen grain. Thank you, sir, for this opportunity. We'll continue tomorrow also, and I will finish the topic. We will try for that. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
थँक्यू सर.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dear colleagues, I am very much sorry for the technical delay, technical glitches. We are many times helpless before the technology. I will repeat my sentence, because sir was also trying his best, but at the end we found that since he was not sharing his slide, or he was unable to share his slide, at that time his voice fluency was very good. That's why what I have advised him, that he will send the PPT, and so that the madam can share PPT from her side, and he will talk on the topic. So you will also be getting the PPT as he has desired, so that whatever slides which you have missed due to technical problem, those slides you can see and match with what he has said. So now we will start with the seminars. Okay, today we have 8 seminars. Now I will request all the presenters to be very specific as far as time is concerned.